Welcome back into the studio for this Technique Tuesday. Today I am going to show you how to create a really interesting texture using old egg cartons. So this is the top off of one of those, so there's not all the individual wells of the egg carton, and it doesn't matter. You can use a regular egg carton, or you can use this, or any pulpy type of paper product that's been recycled. So I prefer it's a lot less work to just tear these up into relatively small pieces and let them soak in water. It doesn't matter how much water, you just need to make sure that pieces aren't dry, they're getting saturated. And you can actually make this and save it as long as you contain it into an airtight container. I would like this to paper paste. So I am gonna make some to have extra. So you're just gonna rip up pieces until you get an approximate amount that, an amount that you think you can work with. If you're doing an individual project, or more if you want to refill a tub or create some for you to use whenever you choose. This is a little bit more fibrous than the regular paper texture paste that you might find on the market. So depending how well you get your fibers saturated and chopped down, that will depend on how well you can, let's say, put it through a stencil. So you want to make sure everything's really saturated. I might need to add more water to this. And if you use warmer water, it does work a little bit faster. So that definitely needs more water. We want it to be sitting in water. All right, so now is the hard part. We need to let it sit. It needs to be very saturated. We are waiting for the fibers of the paper to break down. So now we're gonna set this aside and forget about it for a while, and then come back and double check. All right, so this is sat for 24 hours, and you can kind of see how brown the water is. So I'm gonna drain the water and fill it with hot water, and I'm just checking to see how much it falls apart, because you want it to really fall apart fairly easy. I think I'm gonna let it sit for another 24 hours because it seems a little rubbery. All right, so here we go. We have 2 days, 48 hours, and you can really see how it's broken up a lot and how thick this water is becoming. I don't know if you can see. It's pretty thick in there. So you have a choice now. You can go through and then just hand rip some of these depending on how far down yours has gone. In the water, and I would add a little bit more to this, you want it pretty liquidy. You can either use an immersion tool, you can use a blender. I used to have a dedicated blender for paper making, and this is how I would start my paper making. Or you can take 2 forks like you would shred meat, and you can go in here and do some of that to get this broken up. You want this broken up pretty small. So what I'm gonna do is I am going to use my immersion tool, kitchen tool. I think it'll probably be the best since I don't have a dedicated blender any longer. All right, so I have my immersion tool and I've put this in a deeper container and added a little bit more water. Well, hopefully I won't get everything everywhere. So you put it in, and then I am gonna put this on sauce and try that. All right, that is perfect. So this should be a lot easier to clean out than a blender. Step is to strain it. And I use cheesecloth, and I just wrap it up into cheesecloth and squeeze out all the water. So you want as little water as possible, but just from a hand squeeze. You don't want to let it sit out and dry completely. So what you're looking for is just you wrap it in the cheesecloth and you squeeze it and get that excess water. So then you have this paste. I like to use the cheesecloth because I get all the very small fibers that comes out with that water. Okay, so I have some I've already done in there, and this is it still in cheesecloth after I squoze it out. And you can see it really separates from the cheesecloth nicely. And just throw it in there. And I'm gonna fluff it a little bit, just so it's not so squished together and easier to mix. So now you can add paint color to it. It will still have a little bit of the gray when you get it thin, but the more pigment you have, actually we can do a little piece. But we're gonna use, this is kind of my favorite to use for making mediums. It's the Blick matte medium. It's because it's not quite as thin as fluid medium, but not as thick as a matte gel medium. So I can actually pour it. It's got a nice consistency to it for this kind of. So we're gonna stir that together. You want a nice amount of the matte medium to really coat all the paper fibers. Now when you buy paper paste, it's usually done with white paper fibers. We're using gray, we're recycling. To me, that doesn't matter. If I don't want to pre-paint it or color it this way, then I'll just leave it gray and paint it when it's dry. So I'm gonna add more. So that's approximately the amount of matte medium I like to use. I like mine a little thicker rather than thin. So if you wanted to, you're doing a project and you wanted it to be white, you would take some of this out, put it into a separate container, and then you would add the paint. You can use just regular white paint, acrylic paint, or you can use gesso. I prefer to use a gesso, it's less expensive. So here is the paper paste that we made. No paint added, no color added. So just how we made it. And you can really see the different colors of paper that they use. There's some red, there's some blue, different color of papers that they used when they made this recycled paper egg carton. And then here is the one that we added the paint color to. You can see it's a little thinner, of course, because we added more liquid to it. All right, and now I'm going to show you paper texture paste if you were to purchase it. And this is my favorite brand of paper texture paste, and you can see how much smoother this is. The fibers are really broken down, and they used white. So I mean, there's always something to be said about using the pre-made version, but how much fun is this to really get some bulky texture going? So what we're going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to play with it a little bit and see, you know, how we feel about it. So I'll come back after this dries. I like to let this dry naturally. That's the way I prefer to work. So I'm going to let that happen, and we'll be right back. Now, I also did want to address that I do have extra of the paper. So I have squoze it out, and I am going to actually let it sit out and dry like this. Because all the glues have been removed, or most of them have been removed, it'll be easier to break these up to make more paste when you run out of your homemade stuff. So I will save this to the side, let it dry out completely. I might even flatten it out a little bit to get it to dry in the center as well, or even break it up and just kind of lay it out to dry like this. And then when this is dry and you're ready to make some more, you depending on how hard it is, you either resaturate it with water, let it disintegrate. You won't need to use the immersion tool or anything, a blender or anything, and then squeeze out the excess water with your cheesecloth, and then add your matte medium to it to create more of the paper paste. So just a tip on if you have lots of paper. I try and make a lot of paper so that I have it, a lot of paper pulp, so I have it available for the next time I want to make more. All right, so we have let this dry, and our paper pulp has dried. So I just usually store this in a Ziploc bag for the next time I need to make some more paper texture paste. So here is some stragglers. Here is the paste with no color added to it. You can see it's very bulky. It's got lots of lumps and bumps to it. Here is the same substance that we added the gesso to. So you can really see the gray and brownish fibers below it, but you have the white with it. And then this is the store brand. It doesn't have much texture. It's more like a soft, one of the softer coarse, the softer gels, mousses. So I use the coarse, Liquitex Basics coarse. It's this texture gel. It's smoother than that. It's very much similar to the Marabou mousse. It's a texture gel, gritty, but it's softer and smoother, and that's kind of how this feels. Maybe a little softer. So it's kind of like doom doom doom. in terms of this. And this, as you recall, is the Finnabair paper texture paste, which I do carry in my store. I have some of this left. It's been discontinued and I can't get a hold of the big bottles of this. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're gonna, what kind of final product you'll have here. So much like other mediums, you can apply paint over the top. Same here, of course, just has a white undertone. And you could have just painted gesso on top, let it dry, and then come in with the paint. And you'll see this kind of has a different, it's not as bulky, but has lots of little crevices. So another thing we could do is we could come in with one of my favorites, this, the Elegant Writer. Let's see, let's get this a little dry. All right, so let's just get some of this on here. See how it responds to the Elegant Writer. So here you can see it's going down into those little crevices. Here it's kind of pulling at the fibers. So kind of nice to be able to show off some of the, this is more absorbent, so it's pulling a lot more densely in the fiber areas. Whereas this more stays on the top because we added that gesso to it. All right, and let's try, see a Stabilo All. Which is kind of like the Elegant Writer, except for yeah, very similar to the Elegant Writer. Similar results. So let's try spray in the Caribbean. My box is far away. This is Sunshine Yellow. Might have an interesting mix here with that Caribbean. Let's do it right. There we go. So there, this is really getting absorbed and you can really see the color still. Here, this more sits on the top because it's an all-around spray, small particles, it gets everywhere. I wonder if we let this dry, what would happen if we put that Stabilo all over the top, because the Marabou sprays don't move like the other sprays do. They're not water soluble. Once they dry, they're fixed. So that might be cool to see what happens. Now this is really neat how we get the different things going on with the color between the Stabilo and the spray and the paper paste, and of course the, so that kind of gives you an idea of the things that you can do. Another thing that's really cool about this homemade paper paste, texture paste, is that you can essentially, you can model it. So on the surface, You can create shapes. You can even take cookie cutters and do some molding. The fibers are not small enough that you can usually do many of the rubber silicone molds out there, but it might be able to handle some of the larger ones, so it can be used there as well. But you can mold it into shapes to apply to the surface of whatever you're working on. I would suggest that maybe rather than just putting it directly on like that, maybe putting a little bit of Fabri-Tac underneath it and then squish it in, because I don't know on a larger, bulkier item if it would remain stuck to the surface. But if you painted over it and that kind of thing, it definitely would. Just dawned on me, let's try this with it not dried and see how. I wonder how that would dry and look if you added it to it while it was still wet. Something else that would be really cool on this is the Glossy Sprays. I have mine in little squirty bottles because I can't keep the nozzles from getting clogged. So I've moved them all into these spray bottles, and I like it a lot better. So let's put a little over here and we'll see how that dries. But that's the glossy. Oh, I like how that's turning out. I like how the gray is peeking through. So this has really absorbed in quite a bit. So let's let these dry and I will show you them, what they look like in the end. Please take the time to like this video if you do, and subscribe if you haven't.